You're listening to the Ask Pastor Steve Cioccolanti podcast, where Pastor Steve unpacks the mysteries of the Bible and connects them to the events unfolding in our world today.
All right, hey Discover Church family, I have here legendary contrarian libertarian investor Doug Casey.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, everybody, although for me, here is out on my farm in Uruguay, across the Plate River from Argentina.
Wow, we were just there last year. We didn't get to explore it enough, so you've obviously picked a wonderful place. You like Uruguay?
The weather's nice, the people's nice. It's a small, stable country, and in today's world, small and stable is good.
That's a very good point. Okay, let me tell our people, I'd find it hard to believe people don't know you, but I'm going to tell the story. You are the founder of Casey Research with 300,000 high net worth readers. You've lived in 10 countries.
Although I'll point out, Steve, that I sold Casey Research to my friend Porter Stansberry about 5 years ago for a lot of money. That's gone, but that's a correct history, correct.
You've lived in 10 countries. You've visited 175 countries. And that's not many people besides you and Michael Yon. Not many people have been to more countries than me. So I can say you certainly have. And your mission is to challenge statism, advocate for liberty and free markets. Doug has had at least 11 books that I can count. Your first one called Drug Lord, Strategic Investing, The International Man, a 1976 Guide to Global Living, which we'd love to talk more about. The big #1 New York Times bestseller for 29 consecutive weeks in 1980 was Crisis Investing. He sold more than 430,000 books. Then a follow-up, Crisis Investing, for the rest of the 90s. Totally Incorrect, which I've had on my bookshelf for, I would say, decades. Right on the Money, Speculator, Assassin, and then The Preparation, How to Become Competent, Confident, and Dangerous.
That last is the most current and important one. It's recently, I just have a copy here. It's a guide for young men who are in a lot of trouble these days, I think you'll agree, telling them that they should not go to college. It's a corrupting influence, and telling them what they should do over that 4-year period of time. Yeah, sorry for the brief commercial, Steve.
No, it's a good commercial. I was reading it because you sent me a copy and I enjoyed it. We have 4 kids and one of them is already of the age thinking about this, and we would agree with you unless you were getting I think you said that like a STEM degree, like engineering or doctor or lawyer, something where you need the qualification. I think you can learn most things on the internet now and get a mentor and become an apprentice. We agree with that. So the book's called The Preparation. Very interesting. One of the latest things that you said that really drew my attention, I know everything you say is very interesting, but it drew my attention because I just came out with the book, The Four Horsemen, is that you also seem to be on this timeline where you think that we're getting close to some kind of a economic event that people are going to be very surprised by. You want to tell us a little bit about what you're thinking on this?
Where to start? We could start with the founding of the U.S., or we could go back much further than that. But let me put it this way. As early before World War I, the U.S. government only took 3 or 4% of the GDP in taxes, and it was entirely from import duties and excise taxes. Now, the U.S. government basically controls the U.S. economy. And the people that run the U.S. government, and this has always been the case because government as an institution is about coercion and force. And these are things that I'm not a fan of, coercion or force. You don't get the best and brightest people working for the government. You get the worst kind of people that like to impose their wills on other people. And I think we're moving to a grand climax economically and politically, financially, and perhaps sociologically. The US government is bankrupt. The US dollar is backed by nothing. It's a paper currency. It's fiat. It's credit, nothing more. And things are very unstable in the world because of all the debt we have. I'd say a rig for stormy weather is good advice. This is always good advice, of course. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. But things have been unstable in the US since about the mid 60s. And now I think we've reached the edge of the precipice. So, in brief, that's the way I see it.
I've got a timeline that I believe is based on the interpretation of the book of Revelation. And so far, it's been a very good predictor. And I'm predicting that it's coming in December of this year or January of next year. So I'm trying to get people to be ready. I know it's hard to believe. People have a normalcy bias. They don't think anything's going to change. And it'll soon be proven right or wrong, whether it happens. But you said in a newsletter in January 26 here, comparing the 1930s to today, you said investors unfortunately seem to make the same mistakes in marshaling their resources as do the generals. If the last 30 years have been prosperous, they base their actions on more prosperity. Talk of a depression isn't real to them because they are, in fact, so different from the 1930s. To most people, a depression means 30s style conditions. And since they don't see that, they can't imagine a depression. That's because they know what the last depression was like, and they don't know what one is. It's hard to visualize something you don't understand. And you said countless millions throughout history have been wiped out financially or worse as the world order changed because they failed to see the correct big picture and take appropriate action. So I think money doesn't disappear, it just gets transferred around. What's going to happen in this next transfer? Is it going to go to crypto? Who's going to make it? What give us some advice on this?
Well, one of the most disturbing aspects of the world, the way it's currently structured, is that the middle class is being ground, as Lenin said, Lenin wanted to grind the middle class between the millstones of inflation and taxation. And that's happening in the US. The middle class is diminishing. People are falling into the lower classes, supported by the government, welfare, Medicaid, Medicare, things of that nature, and the upper classes, which are getting wealthier and wealthier. And the middle class is getting smaller and smaller. And this is very destabilizing because one of the great things about the United States is that it was always a middle class country. It was founded by the middle class. And the middle class are the people that run businesses, that create things, that build families. I'm a big believer in the middle class, the bourgeois, as the Marxists like to call them.
So that's being gutted out. So do you think people just want to be able to afford to buy a home, buy food, pay for their gas, pay their mortgage, and it looks like the nation is going in the right direction, but you are out of the country. So I'll state the obvious. You are not here. Why is Doug Casey, legendary investor, not in the United States? Why have you chosen to leave?
First of all, let me state that the government as an institution is not your friend. All it does is tax you, regulate you, destroy the currency, inflating the currency. Government is pure coercion and force that's been institutionalized. So I like to have as little to do with government as possible. And the US government is by far the most powerful government in the world. So it's especially important to stay away from the US government. That's why I'm down here in Uruguay and Argentina also, where very interesting things are happening. I'm sure happening in Argentina in particular. I'm sure you're aware of them. But I'm afraid that the US is on the edge of something that looks like a civil war, not like the unpleasantness of 1861 to 1865, but the red people and the blue people in the US really hate each other. They can't even have dinner together if they're in the same family. And I think it's almost irreconcilable at this point. It's a real philosophical difference, a moral difference between the red people and the blue people. And the way these things are generally resolved is with violence throughout history. It's unfortunate, but we're part of history.
A lot of people who live in the United States hear this phrase that we're the last free country on earth, and there's no other option out there. When you live internationally and you travel internationally, it just sounds so overboard and so arrogant. But when you live inside the United States, people really believe that. There's no freedom anywhere outside the United States. And what I found out, for instance, is that the United States is maybe the only major country in the world with global taxation. So you are an indentured servant. You belong to the government. No matter where you go, you cannot escape. Whereas most other countries leave you alone. If you're not inside the borders, you're not in their jurisdiction. The power of the IRS, the power to tax you globally, these kind of things actually make America different from other countries and actually less free. Would you agree with that? And have you noticed anything else that maybe Americans are not aware of?
I agree with you completely. Other countries are starting to go to worldwide taxation, taking a very unfortunate lesson from the US. A lot of them are going in that direction.
France is
You
one,
can,
right?
you,
France is trying to change it to global
yeah,
taxation.
Canada's moving in that direction. Britain's moving in that direction. They make it very hard to get out of their webs. But if you can, I think it's important to have a crib outside of your home country, including the United States. And I'm a huge fan of America, the concept of America, because it was the only country in world history that was founded on the ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of the press, individualism, capitalism. It's unique that way. But America has lost its way, it's vanished, and it's been replaced by a nation state called the US. So that it's important that you diversify because things can change rapidly. The Russians were shocked in 1917 when the old order was overturned and Lenin took over the country. The Germans in 1933. If you didn't have a crib outside Germany, you were in trouble. It happened in Vietnam in 1975? It happened in China in 1949. So this is always happening. Governments are overthrown and changed. The culture of the country changes. So if you're in a financial position to do this, and you should make sure that you are in a financial position, you should have a second place that you can go if the going gets very tough and nasty.
So as a Christian, I'm building a Christian community, a Christian estate, the first Christian estate ever in the nation of Thailand. And I've got issues on both sides. The Thais have never seen a Christian estate. The foreigners don't think they need it or don't think they can afford to go. And they don't realize land and construction costs is so much cheaper. Cost of living is like a third. You're instantly like 3 times richer just by moving to the strategic location. So I'd like you to speak into that because you've been to 175 countries. The first thing is, where do you think are the safest places besides, I would guess, Uruguay, Argentina? What else would be on your like kind of top 5, top 10 list?
It's funny that you mentioned Thailand because I'm a big fan of Thailand. Spent a lot of time there. I love Thailand. And oddly enough, Thailand is at the antipodes of Uruguay and Argentina, right through the world, exactly on the other side of the world. And they're very different culturally, food-wise, every wise that you can imagine. Where would I go now? What are the safest places in the world?
Yeah. You're a young man and you've got options. And where would you take your family? Where would you go to be safe if there was
Well,
civil
look,
war here or World War III worldwide?
one thing you said, Steve, that I think is very wise, it's that you want to surround yourself with like-minded people that share the same values that you do. If you're putting together a community where people can do that, I think that has a lot going for it as an idea. Now, where would I go right now? If I was a young man looking to make my fortune, I might consider Africa. Now, on the one hand, Africa during this century is going to be the epicenter of lots of wars because none of those countries in Africa are real countries. They're all artificial constructs with different tribes, different language groups. Africa is going to be the source of a lot of trouble. But on the other hand, if you're an American, with the things that an American knows, the capital resources, the connections, the knowledge, going to Africa makes you different than anybody else. Everybody wants to get to know you. And within a matter of a month, you could probably be sitting down with the president. So I'd say from an entrepreneurial point of view, Africa would be my favorite place to go, but not to live for the long term. It's got too many other problems. Where else would I go? I think Europe. is a sinking ship in many ways. It's totally burdened by taxes, by inflation, by regulation. It's lost its way.
They still want
Oh,
net zero for carbon, which would totally
oh,
destroy their economy. They can't even run their dream of AI data centers, which we don't necessarily want. They can't do anything without depending on China and fuel from Russia.
and the people that run Europe, all of their prime ministers and presidents, impress me as incompetent sociopaths at best. I don't know what the problem with the average European is that they elect somehow people like that. So rule out Europe. Africa's a special situation. I think that Southeast Asia, from many points of view, is going to be one of the best places in the world to be, frankly. They're not burdened by a lot of the problems that we have in the West. So that's a favorite of mine too. Not just Thailand, but Southeast Asia generally speaking. Even Japan. I'm a big fan of East Asia generally speaking. So these are all places worth looking at.
I asked Michael Yon that because he's in Japan a lot of the time. And I said, look, if things go down, things get really rough, you're in Japan. Does that mean you favor Japan as a safe place? And he said, definitely not. So I was
Hmm.
surprised by that. From a geological point of view, you've got the earthquakes, you've got the potential volcanoes. They're in massive debt, they're in decline. But I was surprised he said it's not safe because they have very low crime.
I'm surprised that Michael would say that. Maybe he's afraid of a war with China, between Japan and China, which is entirely possible. But anyway, I like Japan for just about every reason you can like a country. But where do you go? It's a kaleidoscope. Things are always changing that way. For years, I lived in New Zealand, which is a very mellow place. But New Zealand and Australia are both on their way to becoming kinder and gentler versions of police states, quite frankly. I don't know, the best thing that a person can do, especially a young person, is to do as much traveling as possible, to have a boots on the ground impression of the different countries of the world and what their pros and cons are. It's best to do that when you're young and can live cheaply and travel cheaply and move among the people, which if you travel when you're older, you're not likely to do. You're likely to stay in expensive hotels and not go into the bad parts of town to get that part of the society. So travel a lot. That would be one piece of advice I'd offer to everybody.
Yeah, travel a lot or listen to Doug Casey, who's traveled a lot.
I'm flattered, but it's true because most of what people know or what they think they know today comes over the electronic media today. And frankly, I don't trust much of what I see on my computer screen unless I know the person personally that I'm communicating with.
Imagine walking where Jesus walked, standing on Mount Sinai, experiencing the prophetic significance of Israel firsthand, not as a tourist, but as a disciple. Travel with Pastor Steve Cioccolanti on life-changing faith-based tours to the Holy Land, Jordan, Iceland, Thailand, and beyond. These aren't ordinary tours. They're mentoring journeys designed for prayer, teaching, fellowship, and personal encounters with God in the very places where Scripture comes alive. Pastor Steve has traveled to over 50 nations, and now he invites you to discover God's world with fresh eyes and a deeper understanding of his timeline. Space is limited. Visit travelwithpastorsteve.com to explore upcoming tours and reserve your spot. Come walk the Bible into life.
Most people's connection with the world is not boots on the ground anymore. It's via our screens or the TV or whatever.
I got boots on the ground going down to El Salvador, Honduras. I've got a contact down in Panama, Costa Rica. I went down to Uruguay and Argentina. I looked at all this and I thought it would probably be easier to recommend Americans to get a plan B, a second home, an option. We call it a Goshen. Goshen was a safe place during the 10 plagues of Egypt. So we say that term, Goshen, meaning a safe place when bad things happen. One of the things that a banker, actually a significant bank in Latin America, told me, he says, you never know in Latin America. It looks good now, looks good in El Salvador, it looked good in Brazil, and look how fast Brazil flipped. The former conservative president is like 20 years in jail. His son is supposedly running for president. I don't know how they're going to allow that because I guess he would pardon his father. But do you feel that in Uruguay, Argentina, or do you think there are exceptions where it can be relatively dependable?
Argentina is a special situation now because it was infected with the bug of Peronism starting after World War II. Juan Domingo Perón was a huge fan of Benito Mussolini. And Mussolini, you may know or not, is the one that coined the word fascism. The word fascism comes from the Roman fasces, which were rods that surrounded an axe. The axe represented the state, and the fasces were to make the axe stronger. And that was the business and corporations of ancient Rome. And that's what Mussolini promoted. Perón, when he took over Argentina after World War II, inculcated the country with fascism, where corporations and the state had a partnership and were molded together. It wasn't exactly socialism, communism. Corporations, the stock market, private property don't exist to a greater or lesser degree. But all these things still exist in a fascist state anyway. Argentina used to be one of the most prosperous countries in the world for lots of reasons, but a change in its philosophy ran it into the ground. However, 2 years ago, Javier Milei was elected in Argentina mostly by the young people, and he ran on a platform of anarcho-capitalism. He's a pure libertarian who wants to eliminate the state, wants to eliminate coercion from public life. And he's made a lot of changes in Argentina. And the young people, especially, are the ones that back him because they were the ones that realized they were being stolen from, turned into serfs for the future. A little bit of a commercial for Argentina. Different. It's always been different. But now it's very different from any other country in Latin America. Because what you said is true. The rest of these Latin American countries have traditionally been run by what they call strongmen, where in all of these countries, there's 10 or 50 families, wealthy families that basically own and control the country. Argentina is worth investigating for everybody at this point. And as far as language problems, I'd say that Argentines as a group have a better grip of English than any other country in Latin America, which is helpful.
There's one English-speaking country in Latin America. I'll just throw it out there. Have you ever been to Guyana?
Spent a lot of time in Guyana and Suriname next door, which is also basically English speaking, although it's an ex-Dutch colony. Guyana's got some problems in that racially, about half the people are of East Indian descent and half are African descent. And they don't cross over very much and they're antagonistic with each other. So the future for Guyana, it's problematical. And of course, the Indians, many of them are Hindus, many of them are Mohammedans, and the blacks are mostly Christians. That's another dividing line between the two groups. So I'm not sure, especially with the huge discovery of oil that Guyana's had made for them recently, there's going to be a lot of money in a big pot. And the people in the government are going to try to steal most of it for themselves, but it's going to be divided along these racial lines that I just mentioned. I don't know. What do you think about Guyana? You have an opinion?
I was going to say that people often make their moves based on language. So they think if I can get to an English-speaking country like the Philippines or Belize, then it's going to be great. Guyana is another one of those options. And I'm trying to say that if you want to get out of the reach of the globalists completely, you want to be out of the whole English-speaking colony system because they implemented the lockdown with extreme efficiency. From Singapore to Australia, they were so efficient. I think the directives somehow come through either England or America. So even though it sounds hard to get into a country that speaks another language, I think that type of barrier is good. It's necessary to stay away from the turmoil. And that's why I don't mind a country like Thailand. You've been there many times. You don't feel like you can't get along or make a purchase. It's no problem. They're not
It's no
fluent, but
problem.
they will try their best to speak English to you.
Yeah, and the Thais are pretty good that way, frankly. And of course, learning Thai is harder for an English speaker than learning Spanish for a lot of reasons. But listen, you only need 500 basic words to do almost anything you need to do in any country. It's not that hard to learn 500 words in any language. So, yeah, you're right.
For a safe place, Guyana probably isn't the place to go. Still got a lot of crime, oil money, and diamonds. Unless you're in the inner circle, I think try to stay away from things like that.
Yeah, I agree. The most stable countries, I think, as a general rule, are those that have a lot of ownership on the part of the average guy of the land area, of farms and this type of thing. And that's what you really want. And it doesn't have a huge pool of money. Like Argentina, for instance, was rich, but it didn't have any giant pool of oil, which draws the wrong kind of people to try to steal it all. You want a country where the land is privately owned to the greatest extent possible. Argentina and Uruguay, and I like Chile too, all three of those countries. Actually, I like Paraguay too. Very interesting, unusual country in many ways. But in Latin America, those would be my choices. And in Central America, my choices would probably be Costa Rica, which has a lot of immigrants from the US and Canada. And Belize is not a bad choice. And they do speak English, which is helpful in some ways and not in other ways, like you pointed out. I'm not sure that any of the Caribbean islands, they're not economically sustainable, most of them. They rely on tourism. And when times get tough, you can't rely on tourism to sustain yourself. So I'm not sure that the Caribbean would be the place where I would go.
You've made another point that's sparked some thoughts. One of the things that makes a country free, when people say America is the freest country in the world, and yet people can have their home ripped from under them unless you have a homestead law in some states like Florida has. You cannot be sued for your own primary residence. But in a lot of the Western nations, you're a slave to the banks and they can just raise interest rates. They know it's going to squeeze you out and people lose their homes. And stable countries are those countries where the majority of people own their own property privately. And that's something that people don't know about Thailand, is that we've gone through so many cycles of ups and downs, but I literally know one person in my entire life and asking around, one person who lost their home. People don't lose their homes. Almost nobody is in debt. People have their own homes outright. If they have a mortgage, the banks are not predatory. They're not trying to destroy you and make money and take your property. The one person who actually lost the money, lost the home, I asked her, how did that happen? Because it's so unusual. Interest rates never go super high for residential loans. And she said she didn't pay her mortgage for 2 years. And the bank
Ooh.
kept coming to her and say, please make any payment, please, anything. And she wouldn't. And so when they put the house on the market, they called her first and they said, please bid first, please be the first one. And she wouldn't. So it's almost like she pushed the case over the edge, just she lost it, but she didn't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. Listen, bad habits have bad consequences. So for whatever reason she did that, who does she have to blame but herself? It sounds to me.
But it's a very interesting point you've made that I haven't fully formulated. I think that's one of the stable things about a country is when you have private ownership. And that's one of the things that Trump just said. I don't know if you noticed that about Greenland. That was one of his points. He said, we're here defending Greenland and NATO. And he says, who wants to defend leased land? He wants people to defend what they own. Now, I know that you're a non-interventionist, probably all around domestic foreign policy. Do you have anything to weigh in on Greenland?
The ideal solution that I see is that Greenland would be an independent country. Now, you might say, wait a minute, how could a country be independent if it's only got 57,000 residents? But frankly, all of the countries in the Caribbean have that or less, and they're independent members of the United Nations for what that's worth, not much anymore. I don't see any reason why Greenland shouldn't be independent. Greenland for the Greenlanders. I think the big danger or the likely direction is not that the US expands and becomes bigger by acquiring Greenland, but gets smaller as there are secession movements where the US actually breaks up. 100 years from now, I'm very confident that the map of the United States will not look like today's map. I think it's likely to break up into different regions because Southern California, which is populated mostly by Mexicans these days, has absolutely nothing in common with Maine, for instance. And young Chicanos in Los Angeles are going to resent paying 25% of their income for Social Security alone to support old white broads in the Northeast. This is why countries break up. I think it'll happen to the US.
Very interesting because we have prophecies about that, not just from me, but from other people in the church. They've seen that there will be a breakup. It will be the result of the Civil War. America will get broken up. The whole currency system will change when that happens. So it's very hard for Americans to think about all this. How should they position themselves besides relocating, which I highly recommend, but I get a lot of comments in social media. They say, nice luxury for you two to say that, but Americans feel totally trapped. They feel like they have no options. And it would be a dream to have a second home, but they can't even pay off their first home. What's the best way that they could prepare?
They should prepare psychologically because you don't want to act like a potted plant that doesn't move and can't move. That's okay for a plant, but being immobile is not a good survival strategy for human beings. The important thing is, I think, other than girding yourself up psychologically and morally, because you always want to do the right thing. And most people don't think about that, the consequences. They don't think of they're not critical thinkers about what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil. This is another thing that people should do.
The world is changing fast, and believers need connection, discipleship, and uncensored biblical truth more than ever. Discover Church Online isn't just a digital spot, it's a global church family of believers united in faith, fellowship, and purpose. Through daily prayer gatherings, live Bible studies, and care groups across every time zone, DCO provides real community, encouragement, and support wherever you are in the world. Each week, receive powerful prophetic teaching from Pastor Steve Cioccolanti, free from big tech censorship and rooted in God's Word. No matter where in the world, Discover Church Online is always alive and always open. Visit discoverchurch.online and become a member today, or call 1-855-8-LOOK-UP to speak with our team who's here for you.
But in the practical, real world, you've got to build some assets. And the nature of the world has made it very hard. Having been a long-term buyer of gold and silver, and they've gone over 100 to 1 from where I started buying them, I feel a little bit edgy paying high prices for them today, where they are. But where else can you save? You can't save with fiat currencies. They can dry up and blow away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane. The dollar's nothing. It's just paper backed by a bankrupt government. The important thing to remember is produce more than you consume and save the difference. The question is, in what do I save it? And even though gold and silver are quite high at this point relative to where they were and relative to other things like clothes and cars and houses, food, you ought to build a grub stake of gold and silver at this point. I'm not going to tell people to learn to speculate, although I think that's probably important because, for instance, in the classic collapse of Germany in the Weimar Republic after World War I, everybody in Germany was forced to become a speculator as the currency lost all value and they had to trade with each other looking for some way to preserve their wealth. Learning the skills of a speculator are also important. Save with gold and silver, learn about the methods of investing, which is harder and harder in today's world, and try to perfect the skills of a speculator, which is not easy to do and actually not a good idea for most people, although most people are going to be forced to do it, sadly.
Let me clarify that the difference between investing and speculation. Chris McIntosh described you as a speculator in the original sense of the word, which is someone who capitalizes on government-led distortions, create asymmetric outcomes, but they also create opportunities. So maybe you can explain that a little bit to the people who don't know. Could you take us back to how did you become a success speculating, and what would that mean today?
Actually, it first came to mind when I read a book back in 1970, a long time ago, I was just out of college, called You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation, written by Harry Brown, who became subsequently a very close friend of mine. In that book, Harry predicted that gold and silver both were being artificially controlled by the US government. There was a fixed amount of gold and silver, but they were printing up dollars by the billions. So it was logical, and he explained why gold and silver were going to go higher. And that was my starting point. It's a question of looking for stupid things that the government does and betting against them. George Soros, who I'm not a fan of, incidentally, but that's not to say he's not a smart guy, made a lot of money shorting the British pound at a time when it was artificially high and be artificially maintained by the British government at unreasonably high levels. So you're always looking for something the government has done so that you can take advantage of it or bet against it, because the government is an institution. And I'm not talking about the Democrats or the Republicans. Today, they're basically two sides of the same coin, although the Democrats are going a lot crazy these days, even though I don't particularly care for either Republicans or Democrats as a libertarian. What you want to do is look for things that they've done that have made things artificially cheap or artificially expensive. Not hard to find those things. You got to keep your eyes open. But that's the essence of being a speculator. It's not being a gambler. A gambler is playing a zero-sum game where the house takes a cut. And a lot of people confuse speculation with gambling. They're not at all the same thing. And they confuse investing with speculating. Investing is taking a seed of corn, planting it, and seeing it grow up to a stalk where you get hundreds of seeds. That's the nature of investing, except with companies. So it's important to know the definition of words. And investing, speculating, gambling, and saving, that's another word which is conflated with these others. They're all different, and it's important to understand the difference between them.
In terms of crypto, would it be a speculation opportunity if the government starts pouring in millions and billions of dollars into it? I guess their end game is they want everyone to get into their digital dollar, their CBDC. It seems to me the money's just going to keep flooding into it, even though it could be a house of cards, even though our mutual friend Michael thinks it's all a big scam. Could you speculate on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at cryptos, and there are scores of thousands of these cryptos, most of them are absolutely worthless. There's one that is different, and that is Bitcoin. I'm a believer in Bitcoin. I've been in Bitcoin since 2017, which makes me a little bit of a late adopter, but early enough in the big context.
Same time as me. 2017, I was probably the first pastor accepting Bitcoin as tithes and offerings.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Now, Bitcoin is different. Aristotle in the 4th century BC named the 5 characteristics of a sound money. In order for something to be used as money, a good money, what does it have to be? It has to be durable. That's why we don't use wheat as money. It has to be divisible. That's why we don't use artwork as money. You can't make change for the Mona Lisa. It has to be convenient. That's why we don't use lead as money. It takes too much to be value. It has to be consistent. That's why we don't use diamonds as money. Each is different from the other, or real estate for that matter. And it has to have use value of itself. And that's certainly true of gold and silver. And Bitcoin is its use value is that it's instantly transferable and it's quite private. And there's a sixth reason that Aristotle didn't mention because it was irrelevant in ancient times, is that it can't be created out of nothing. Bitcoin can only be created by performing work, proof of work. The dollar can be created by the trillions, by the US government. So 6 characteristics of good money. Bitcoin suits all of those. A few of the other cryptocurrencies like Monero, very interesting to me also. But what the government is going to do, because everything the government touches, it corrupts. Now they're going to try to put out a CBDC, central bank digital currency, and have everybody use it. So you won't even have paper in your wallet. Everything will be digital, all controlled by the government or the central bank. This is a disaster for individuals and for private organizations. You don't want to do that. You don't want to conflate Bitcoin with the government's Bitcoin lookalike, which they'll say, hey, it's this, we're backing it, our central bank digital currency. Stay away from those things. Don't use it whenever possible. I think you just want to be in precious metals and Bitcoin in your own possession.
A lot of Christians, they're in what they call the XRP army. And they're absolutely convinced XRP is going to go up to $5, $50. They think that's going to be the final one. When the house of cards fall, they believe that it's going to be the final one that the banks use.
Yeah, but why do they believe that? And why do they believe the banks will use that one of all the ones out there?
There's a standard called ISO standard. It complies. There's 4 coins that Trump mentioned that complies with ISO. One is Cardano, XRP. Trump put it out in one of his tweets that the government should have a fund to start amassing certain coins. Solana, Cardano, XRP.
Oh, goodness. It's so hard to keep up with everything that Trump does and says. But listen, a cardinal rule of dealing with money is don't get involved with anything that you don't understand thoroughly. And I have no idea what this dog's breakfast of cryptos, which can be created like Federal Reserve notes out of nowhere. And if the government does it, it's going to be corrupted. So whatever it is, it's probably a mistake to get involved in something unless you really know what you're doing. And I don't think most of the people in that do. So I'd stay away from it just for the reasons I mentioned.
The main thing that we're agreeing on that people are not aware of, and we're trying to ring the bell here, is whatever's coming is going to be different from the 1930s. And it's going to be a shocker. Yeah. I read that you said 4 different things are different from the 1930s. Corporate bankruptcy, unemployment, welfare, which they didn't have such a welfare state back then, and then the regulations. I mean, each of these are topics in themselves, but things are just so different. People don't understand. Please explain what you mean.
The world is a very different place socially than it was back then. Back in the 1930s, most Americans were either living on the farm or were one generation from the farm. They knew how to make things with their hands. Most Americans don't now. All they know how to do is work in a cubicle on a computer. That's what most people do. That's why one of the things that I recommend in our book, The Preparation, is that people actually learn a trade, learn how to do things with their hands, among many other things. We suggested a young man go to Italy and learn to become a first-rate chef. Great skill to learn. You don't have to become like Gordon Ramsay or whatever, but many skills. You want to have these skills. Most people don't have that. They don't know how to grow their own food. They don't know how to do anything but turn on a television or turn on a computer. So listen, back in those days, mortgages on farms or houses, they didn't have 30-year mortgages. if you got a mortgage from the bank, it was short term. And most debt was self-liquidating. In other words, a farmer would borrow money to finance his next crop comes in, pay off the loan. It wasn't perpetual debt. There are so many differences between the way things are. People didn't see the government as being their daddy. They were more independent. People were more family oriented. The fact that people, fortunately, we can travel, we can fly, we can drive anywhere across the country or across the world. But in those days, people kept their family close to them because they couldn't move from the area. That made things more stable too. So there are gigantic differences between now and the 1930s. And all I can tell you is that I think that the standard of living, which has been artificially supported by lots of debt, where people have borrowed from their own future, mortgaged their own future, and borrowed from the savings of other people put together in the past, the standard of living is going to drop pretty significantly. And that's what a depression is. It's a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. And it's going to be accompanied by bank failures and all kinds of things like that. You don't want to live in a big city, for one thing.
You're saying off the top of your mind what I have to research. My next book's called Goshen Nations. And one of the first things, even Jesus said, when you see these things happen, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, flee the cities, flee, get out of the cities. That's 2,000-year-old advice and is still standing true today. Get out
That's
of the
right.
major cities.
Yeah, that's right. When you get large groups of people together, they can go crazy together. And small groups, that's less likely to happen.
Thank you so much. We've learned a lot from you. Can we close on something? I want to give the audience something that they might not hear typically from Doug Casey. I looked up that you were a former Catholic, and I don't think you're Catholic today. Tell us a
No,
little bit about what do you believe about Jesus and God and the Bible? Have you formed any opinion on this in your later years?
I'm not look, people have always had religions, and religion might be defined as a quest for answers about what happens after you shed this mortal coil, after you die. Everybody wonders, okay? And some religions believe you're reincarnated. Some people believe that you vanish. Some people believe that you are integrated into the cosmic consciousness. Even Christians have differing ideas of what happens after you die. And don't forget that eternity is a long time. It's trillions of years when the stars burn out. Look, I'm not a fan of any religion in particular, certainly not of the Catholic Church. It has lots of problems. And I'm certainly not a fan of Mohammedanism, which is more of a political cult than a religion, if anything else. So when it comes to Jesus, the things he says in the four Gospels, the wisdom that Jesus says, and I agree with, I must agree with about 90% of the things that Jesus says in the Gospels, I think it's wonderful. And people, listen, people need something to get them through the night because nobody knows what's going to happen after you die. I'm not sure that Jesus didn't even describe what happens after you die. You'll be with me and the Father. Okay, what happens? A lot of problems about religion in general, Christianity in particular. Insofar as I have a religion, it would be critical thinking, trying to examine everything and not discard anything out of hand. Look at it, see if it makes sense, try to determine if it's good or evil, and act accordingly. But any particular religion, no. But I'm sure what you're doing, Steve, is the right thing. And what you're doing is to try to improve the world, which I thoroughly approve of.
We are trying to. And I agree. I started out Catholic as well and saw a lot of issues and hurts. But I'd be interested, Doug, when you could have a moment and read a chapter or two of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And I think that you'll see, like you say, look at the evidence, look at what's there, because I think if there is a God, he has to give some objective proof. there's got to be some objective thing other than our feelings and our emotions and our desire for some certainty. And I think that just like investing is thinking about the future, knowing whether God is real and whether Jesus is real, it's a kind of insurance, isn't it? It's your best investment that you'll ever make.
If you can be sure that you're making the right investment.
If you can.
Let's hope that you're not buying the spiritual equivalent of a penny stock, as it were. But listen, it's important that we think about the concepts of good and evil and what, if anything, happens to us after we shed this mortal coil. I approve of religious investigations and trying to figure these things out as best we can, Steve.
Thank you. You're very open-minded. Doug, it's such an honor to have you on our show. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of inquiries about your book. It's called The Preparation: How to Become Competent, Confident, and Dangerous. That's a pretty good title. Thank you so much, Doug. Is there any website that you want people to find?
Just go to internationalman.com, and my channel is on YouTube. It's not hard to find if you just Google Doug Casey on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Doug. God bless you.
Thanks, Steve. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Put God first. Keep looking up.
This Discover Truth podcast and the global outreach of Discover Ministries is listener supported. If this program has strengthened your faith, would you consider partnering with us? To learn more, connect with our worldwide church community, and find ongoing biblical teachings, go to discoverchurch.online. And if you need prayer, support, or would like to speak to our team, call us anytime at 1-855-8-LOOK-UP. Thank you for standing with us as we share biblical truth and prepare believers for the return of Jesus Christ.